So it is May 28th, 2016. We're here in Pembroke Hall on Brown University campus. And my name's Whitney Pape. I'm the interim Pembroke archivist. And I'm here with members of the class of 1991 for their 25th reunion. Ladies.
Hello. Introduction.
Name?
Hi, my name is Triani Chang, class of 91. I was a IR and Complit major here at Brown.
I'm Chris Vallejo, class of 91. I was an English major while I was here at Brown. And I came to Brown from Los Angeles. And when I came to campus in the fall of 1987, I was following in the footsteps of my father, who was class of 63. And who spent most of that weekend dropping me off saying, oh, when I lived here, oh, when I went here, which was delightful. And 25 years later, this morning I called him and said, Dad, I'm walking through Riston. Oh, when I lived here. I'm grateful for that continuity. My little brother followed me 3 years later, and what I think is tremendous about Brown is that, not that you've asked yet, but it was the perfect school for each of the three of us, and we could not be more different. So my dad was delighted that we were at his alma mater, but I never would have attended the Brown that he chose in 1959. And it was a totally different school for me and a totally different opportunity for my brother. So happy to be back.
My name is Sharon Besser, of course, from class of 91. At Brown, I was an Ed Studies major. And we're not talking about the rest of we're just doing the background.
Go ahead.
Go further is what
Say
we're
what
actually doing now. And now I am a professor of education at Edgewood College in Madison, Wisconsin, and I work on teacher prep programs. And my mother was from Pembroke, and class of 65. And so yes, long family history here.
I'm Prudence Carter, class of 91. This is my first time back to campus in 14 years.
Wow.
So I'm from Mississippi. This was a foreign land for me when I arrived here 25 years ago. Well, more than 25 years ago. What's that, 29 years ago. I was an applied mathematics and economics major. Don't ask me how I got to where I am today, but I'm now an educational scholar, sociologist, particularly of education, and I currently work at Stanford University, and I'm on my way to the University of California, Berkeley, as its Dean of the School of Education.
Pamela Bass, class of 91 as well, and like Chris, I actually came to Brown, and my sister was here 5 years earlier, graduated in the class of 86, and there's no question if anything held me from Brown, it was going to be that I saw myself so different from my sister, but definitely learned Brown was my Brown, and she had her version of Brown as well, and it was the perfect place for me and to call home. And from Brown, I had a 20-year career in terms of college athletics and have recently made the move now to the law.
Welcome, everybody. Maybe you could all start by talking about what went into your decision to study at Brown. We've heard a little bit about maybe why you thought you might not study at Brown, but how did you hear about Brown? What did you think when you came to visit, etc.?
I can say the easiest thing was when I did my tour of colleges across the country the summer before our senior year, I came to Brown, and it was the one school where everybody said hello when you walked down the street, and there was very much of a friendly community atmosphere, and that made all the difference to me.
Well, I had never heard of Brown. It was a random thing. I was at a summer program after my junior year of high school, and I was at a 6-week summer session at Phillips Andover Academy, and all of the kids were talking about this great university called Brown, which at that time I thought was named after a color. And I was like, okay, and they were like, you have to go on this trip. We're going on a summer trip to Brown. So when I finally tried to get a ticket, it was sold out because it was so popular. But fast forward a couple of months later, and after the PSATs and all the college catalogs are coming through, it comes into my mailbox in my parents' home, and I had no idea where I was going to college, and I randomly applied, and 25 years later, here I am as an alumnum. But it was a wild ride. I would say a teacher probably put me on the path to the introduction of Brown, and then those students of mine that summer, those friends of mine that summer, really, they raved about it. I came to visit this place, and I fell in love immediately. I was supposed to go to Amherst the same weekend, at mid-weekend, or that time when we would come and visit. And I ended up like dropping the Amherst trip just to stay here a little longer because it was just that vibrant and engaging. I fell in love immediately, so it was definitely the place for me.
And I came actually from my mother as well, but also I was a rower. I was on the crew team here, and I had rowed in high school. And so at that time, there wasn't heavy recruiting of rowers, so I was a little bit of an anomaly but I knew enough to contact the coach, and so I wanted to kind of meet him and see kind of the boathouse, and I got to stay overnight. Mm-hmm. And do you remember where I stayed in Gnarly House? Mm-hmm. So Gnarly House is it's been torn down now.
It's parking lot.
And there were a bunch of rowers that lived there that I got to stay with, and I just absolutely fell in love with the place. I loved these women that I met, were just amazing, and it was just an instant sense of being a place you could be a part of. And that it would be different from my high school sort of thing that wasn't that, positive, that this was going to be like a haven for me.
My dad had kept in touch with Dave Zacconi, who was at Brown about the same time that Dad had been, but was currently the exec director of the Sports Foundation. Dave became a really important person to me in my time here, but I met with him on our regular college tour. The prep school I attended in Los Angeles did a regular spring and junior year trip. They were really facilitating East Coast college application. And so when we stopped at Brown, I met with Dave Zacconi. And that gave me a reason to do something away from the crowd. And so when I left my meeting with Dave, I headed back toward main campus by myself, and it was already my campus. Like I hadn't applied, I wasn't in, but wow, the sense of home, the sense that I would live here and not just learn here was already very powerful. So I applied early and was admitted and pretty much never looked back, never thought twice. Glad I didn't.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. I was living overseas at the time, and I had never been here. So it was kind of the college equivalent of a blind date. I knew a little about the university. I applied to, 7 or 8, got into, I think, all of them except for one, and then was looking at the options. But I was living in Jakarta, Indonesia at the time at the international school. And I think there was one guy I'd vaguely known who was 2 classes ahead of me who ended up here, but it was just a dot on a map to me. And so I ended up, as I mentioned, a complet and an IR major here, and I think that there's something very real about the way people express themselves and articulate themselves in the materials. And so I spent a fair amount of time in my high school library in Indonesia for many reasons, including it was air conditioned, and reading about colleges and sort of thinking about that. So I narrowed it down and ended up, I think, making absolutely the right choice for me, but it was sight unseen.
How quickly did you know it was going to be okay?
I frankly, I had a bit of culture shock coming back into the U.S., so I hadn't lived here since really for 6 or 7 years, and there was a bit of that. But I liked the independence of the place. I liked how everybody was just free to be who they were, and I think I knew within the first year.
I can't tell you how many people mention that feeling of home, like on their first visit. So there is something about the place that just sort of connects with certain people.
When I mentor students now about college selection, because I'm also a university professor now, but when I mentor students about college choice or about either recruits to my college or people thinking about graduate programs, I sort of say, like, you can read all you want, but if you can see the place, like, you need to live there. Like, it's going to be your place, not just your school. It's very different from, if you attend a day school now and you go home at night, like, this also needs to. So I encourage people to listen to that visceral piece.
Well, I think the thing that I discovered about Brown, for 2 years I did admissions work for Brown. I was an admission officer here. After I left, I graduated. And the one thing I would always say to students across the country is this is one of the few universities, are ones that's really dedicated to the undergraduate experience to the extent. Many of the most elite universities are dedicated, but the graduate experience kind of supersedes because of the research dollars and such. But Brown is known for being a place for the undergraduate experience. And in fact, I would often feel more sorry for the graduate students, because I knew that there was a disproportionate amount of attention to the undergraduate experience. And the programs, the deans, wonderful deans I remember having here, and still having long relationships with those people after 25 years. I think that's the thing that helped create that home kind of feel in some ways. And so I always felt like I was learning as much outside of the classroom as I was inside of the classroom, because of all of the different things in the context, the kind of ethos of Brown. So just solid, very solid for me.
It's actually funny you say that, because right outside on Meeting Street, I can remember the day my parents left when I was a freshman and dropped me off. My dad pulled me aside and said, listen, you're going to learn more outside the classroom at Brown than you are in the classroom. And I really didn't understand what that meant until I was here for a couple of years, and I was like, oh, I get it. Like, it was absolutely right. And it is. I think the students at Brown sell Brown. When I was here as an assistant coach doing recruiting for the women's basketball program, it was important when prospective students came to campus not to spend time with us as coaches. We want them to spend time with the students, because the students sell that independence that you mentioned earlier, and they sell just like the creative things they're able to do, which make this so unique and make it home for the students that are here.
Have you ever met an unhappy Brown alum? Someone who didn't like Brown?
I suppose they don't come back, or they
Maybe
don't
they
identify.
don't. Or even out in the world. Like even out and out, because the network is vast, right?
Yes, yeah.
So not necessarily here on campus, but in your life. And every Brown alumnus or alumni I've met has really loved this place. I mean, we all have variable experiences. I don't want to romanticize or idealize, because there are some institutional things that we can get into. But I will say that
There are and there were,
yeah, there are and there were. But I have most people on the whole whom I've met from all over the world seem to really thrive here in some way.
It'd be interesting to know what those statistics are on people transferring out of Brown.
Yeah,
I would imagine.
that's
Yeah,
a
the
good. That's a
attrition
good.
rate
Yeah,
would
the
be a good
attrition rate.
indicator.
I mean, not everyone, obviously, and I don't, like I said, want to be careful about that. But I've never met someone who graduated from here who didn't like it.
So I'm remembering that investment in undergraduate education.
Yeah.
When we arrived, they were doing some first-year experience, which is funny because I'm on a committee now to try to create a first-year experience at my college, almost 30 years later. So Brown was cutting edge. But the fall of '87, I had an archaeology class with Martha Jakowski and 20-some other students. I mean, oh, hello, this is the person who's in the process of discovering Troy. Oh, you're looking at archaeology. I mean, the things that were handed to us by way of that undergraduate investment. I mean, it was really, and I didn't end up staying in archaeology or even necessarily staying in touch with Dr. Jakowski, but wow, what a profound way to welcome me to campus as a brand new undergrad.
My freshman seminar type class was right in this room, and it was Sport and Society with Arlene Gordon.
Oh my gosh, she was amazing
And
too.
she was, and it was her leadership in terms of women's athletics at Brown, and then her ability to share that with all of us, and just that you could study sports and be part of sports, and how does it reflect society in Brown. So it makes those were great classes.
And a female athletic director in those days was not a typical personnel choice.
Correct.
So, I mean, and she was even interim athletic director for a time, right?
She was interim between.
She was assistant always, but then she was interim between two.
Correct. It was actually interesting, and it goes back to, I believe, the part of the history with Pembroke. At one point, and I don't know if she was the athletic director, but when you had the merging in the 70s of the athletic program, men's and women's, is when she was an assistant. But I don't remember her role earlier, but she was a leader. I mean, she started the Pandas with our ice hockey program.
Yeah.
Did you all feel academically prepared for Brown?
Brown kicked my butt the first year. I mean, I went to a high school. In fact, I was just talking to another young woman from the South. I thrived in high school. Was at the top of my class, did well on the test. But the rigor, the reading, the writing, I was not as prepared for the first year and didn't have the study skills. I come from a high school where you were encouraged to do as well as you could, and the teachers taught us to the best of their abilities. But it's a different experience when you think about the resource context of schools around the country, which is one of the things I learned being an admission officer, that we were recruiting from diamonds in the rough, from the most gritty places in the center cities of the U.S. to some of the most wealthy in large campuses that look like universities, boarding schools and day schools around the country. And so when I saw that research, just the spectrum of resource context, well, I come from somewhere closer to probably the lower decile in the Brown population. And had one for teachers who were committed. My parents are educators. I was not first generation at all. But I realized that the amount of exposure to different kinds of pedagogy, to, some kids came to school, their teachers had PhDs. They were travelers all over the world. They read much more than kids in Mississippi, where our schools were de facto segregated. And so I came out of that context. It shaped me tremendously to be prepared to have the determination and the fortitude to endure that first year. By my senior year, I was fine. But the first year, I had to acquire the study skills to really be able to keep up with all the reading and the writing, because that was the biggest challenge. And also those problem sets in applied math 33 and 34. So, and I would be up burning the midnight oil all the time trying to get those problem sets done. But I tell that story all the time because I don't think that we can fully appreciate the investment Brown has put in and the capital that's been developed in people across the classes who come from such disparate educational context. And that's what makes Brown beautiful to me too, because it does at least request to have that commitment. There are not as many of us as there could be, but if Brown hadn't taken a chance on me, I would not be where I am today. I'm fairly certain of that.
Never mind where you're going next.
Oh, never mind where I'm going next.
I remember having, just noticing how, in terms of time management, how much freedom there was here compared to high school. And what a relief it was, right? But also that it required, study skills. And then I was on the crew team, so I was managing the practices and all of that. And I remember something that they, for a lot of us rowers, or a lot of us athletes, we had to take, there was a writing course we were required to take, right. And being annoyed by that. Why do I have to take this? And the rumor kind of going around, oh, it's because you're an athlete or whatever, and that was edgy, right? And I probably did need that writing course. It was a great course, but just that I was you're not as prepared as some of your peers, so you must take this writing class was an interesting.
I think they looked at our writing samples from essays
to
determine, because I got that level too. I had to take. Do you remember we had to take a test? Like if you were selected, then there was a writing exam that we had to take first year, and then they would place you depending on where they assessed your writing.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I vaguely recall. So I remember there was an English 1 and an English 2 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then there were sections. I had a section on Hawaii, so I learned all about Hawaiian culture and politics. But it was great because, like I said, back then you didn't have the accountability system that you have for public schools today. And so we weren't forced to write as much in high school. And this really helped me, I think, prepare for the writing. By senior year, I was ready. Mm-hmm. Well, by senior year, I could see the difference from freshman year.
Right.
Really, yeah. Yeah, but I did it too. And I wasn't an athlete. I tried crew, by the way, and I failed. I loved it. I wanted to be able to.
I was in that English class also.
You were?
But it was good because it was really the first chance I had to be out of your comfort zone. Mm-hmm. Because, you excel in high school. And it was the first opportunity to say, wait a second, something's not like what I thought it was.
Right.
So to be able to get out of your comfort zone and grow from it, it was really the first class here that helped me take that step. And that's huge for learning.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to look at it.
I'm curious how the academics compared to Jakarta.
It's different. I think that based on the spectrum you're talking about, Prudence, the high school I went to that I was really privileged and blessed to go to was an incredible education outside the classroom, but also inside the classroom. And I had a lot of teachers in high school who had been professors and really wanted to be there. It was also a very tight-knit community, so I think I gravitated towards that viscerally, whatever that was here. So I don't remember having a lot of problems academically the first and second years. I think it was around the third year where the burden of life and extracurricular activities and learning outside the classroom, all that trade-off and time management came in, and just the reality of life. What are you going to do with it, and everything else going on with your friends and the things that matter to you. So that's what I really remember. That the academics were fun, and honestly, I got to sleep in a lot more than I ever did in high school. And after the first semester, I figured out that I shouldn't take that 9 a.m. sociology class. In fact, there was an 11 a.m., something else I could trade off this semester. So I was able to balance that aspect of my life.
What did you end up doing after Brown?
What did I do after Brown? I actually worked at Brown for a couple of years. I was in the Office of International Programs, so the study abroad.
Oh, amazing. Yeah.
And then I went to graduate school for international affairs.
Where?
Georgetown.
Okay. And where are you now?
I'm actually in the Bay Area working at Visa, doing global payments. So it's not all connected. There's a bunch of stuff in there, of course, in my resume that's like, huh?
25 years.
Only makes sense to me.
It's all connected in the wonderful package that is you. Well, you were talking about extracurriculars. And we've talked about crew a little bit. Anybody else participate in clubs or sports or sanctioned or unsanctioned extracurricular activities?
I was very fortunate. I was able to be part of the women's basketball program here at Brown, and that was tremendous in terms of affecting me and then my career after Brown. But I have to say one of the biggest things that I was involved with here at Brown was our resident counselor, head counselor, area supervisor program. That is just amazing. The leadership skills that a Robin Rose delivered to us, a Mary Lou McMillan delivered to us, or Carla Hansen, or Mary Grenadier. I mean, those were, especially as a female, those were incredible skills to have to develop as a woman and as a leader to get while in college. And so I'd say that was one of the most important aspects of growing outside the classroom for me.
So the kind of consciousness building that I acquired here is amazing. Just my political consciousness. I was an MPC, WPC, and I was also the African American programmer at what was then called the Third World Center. I didn't realize its name had changed. And I was quite active in a number of the kind of organizations on campus, some of that acting in theater, did some theater activism, and some of the work involved in protests. I remember doing a lot of spoken word, doing some of the campus mobilizations in the early 90s, late 80s. So that, and being involved in those things was really phenomenal for me. I think those things also helped to direct me towards the path of becoming a sociologist. That thinking about the forces in the society that kind of make us who we are, kind of reproduce the very kind of patterns that we see in our lives. And that came from my experiences at Brown. It was the first time understanding. I grew up in the de facto segregated South in the Mississippi Delta, and also in Jackson, Mississippi. I had never gone to school, with the exception of 2 or 3 maybe very poor white students. I hadn't gone to school with white students. I remember one Asian student in my school and no Latino students. So this was the most diverse environment I'd ever been in. I didn't grow up in a place where we talked about gender equality to the extent that we talked about it here on campus. And certainly not poverty and class inequality, social stratification. What I experienced here, but also what other people brought to the conversation and in the classrooms and in our, staying up late at night and my roommate being so different from me, and all of that just really opened my mind and my eyes to the world in a phenomenal way. And so that's why I say I learned so much outside of the classroom as well. Yeah. But those are the things that I did. Those are all of those activities. Lots of student activism, actually.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
I was going to build on that. So 87 to 91 was a really interesting time here for 3 of those social change threads. That we were still figuring out the ramifications of Title IX, and those were painful in the boathouse because I rode for 2 years too. I don't know if you've ever thought objectively about the differences that
Between
structure.
our locker room and their locker room, and
and then I think it was the gymnastics team brought suit shortly after we finished, right?
Correct.
So that was very much still, although the federal law was in place, the trickle down of how that was actually going to impact female student athletes at Brown had not yet hit. The Third World Transition Program was part of how we were welcoming students to campus, and that was a very as a white person from a privileged background, that was a very interesting way to meet the school because white kids came after, and wow, okay, the students of color have already settled. They've already picked their side of the room. They already know each other. There was that real experience of disenfranchisement, and it took a while to realize what a gift that was to me, to be like, get in line, you know, like you don't get to go first here, get in line. And so I worked with both Pam and Prue in the Res Life programs, and in trying to help students make that adjustment to Brown life and to real experiences of diversity in ways that were healthy and positive. And so that work of how do you articulate that? How do you teach someone that it's good to be uncomfortable, that that's what you came here for? Don't shut down at that. And then while we were here was the publication of Not Guilty, and the sense that we were ready to start undertaking discussions of GLBT, civil rights on campus and off. It was a very difficult time because of the early AIDS epidemic and the ramifications of that. So I felt like in terms of both, all three, gender, race, and sexual orientation, we were learning how to talk. Not just to think, but also then how to talk and help others learn to think. I'm not surprised that we've ended up in, the three of us at least have ended up in education, because that metacognitive work of how do I think about this? How am I feeling about this? How are other people feeling about this? That was very explicitly part of that co-curricular experience here.
That's very well said.
That was rich. Yeah. That was a rich part of it for sure.
Well, I was just going to ask about activism on campus and sort of the political atmosphere and activities that you may have participated in, or that just sort of were formative in some way during your years here.
Well, one of the things that I'm reflecting on, I have to give a talk tonight at the Onyx Dinner, and thinking about what students are asking for this year, the demands, and how it's reemergent. History repeats itself, right? What the students are demanding today are no different from what we were demanding 29 years ago, 27 years ago. We're in a different cultural moment now where I think they've pushed the baton a little bit farther away and in terms of progress, because, or shall I say closer, because of the social media and the linkages across campuses around the country. Now, it's a very fraught ideological issue of what we're talking about, but I remember being a part of the conversations in the 1980s of some of the very things we were asking for, stronger representation in curricula. We were asking for more faculty of color. The reason I became a university professor is because I didn't have any professors who looked like me. And I wanted to be a model. I think I had one, Dorothy Denniston in English, one African-American woman, and then there's a Nani Digenio in Africana Studies. But I didn't really, I felt like, it wasn't so much, there is, this psychological studies show that students do well if they feel like they belong. And part of belonging is feeling like you're represented deeply, not just nominally, in an institution. And so I think we needed that. We needed to feel like this was really home. We didn't want to just be here as the tokens and on the margins. We wanted to be centrally and deeply embedded in the university. And I think that's what this generation is also asking for. We're not visitors. We're not window dressing so it looks like diversity. We are asking that we're all central players and at the table making decisions, sharing resources, sharing the power, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that's what we were fighting for in the 1980s. We certainly didn't have the kind of cultural power that students have today, I think. But I think we helped to lay the foundation in many ways. And we also were engaged in a lot of the same old kind of PC, people call it PC debates, but I think we're trying to really parse out why things were problematic, why this feels racist, why this is classist, why this is homophobic, why these things feel discriminatory. And that, what I'm saying, my consciousness was really shaped by those discussions. And I remember the BDH and lots of the editorials that would come back. Yeah, we had sit-ins. It was just, there were all kinds of things. I remember being a part of a group of students. We all dressed in white and marched into Leeds Theater to audition for a play, because there had never been a major play at Leeds put on that was written by a playwright of color. There were so few playwrights of color's plays were doing. So we all auditioned for kind of a mainstream. I can't remember what it was, but it was one for which we knew we wouldn't get the part or the role. Most of the characters most of the people would have been selected. Most of the characters were white. I don't think we were doing non-traditional casting at that time. But about a dozen of us walked into an audition in all white, and we auditioned for John Amy. I remember that. And after that, the first play, Aisha Rama's, who's since passed away, her play was put on as one of the main plays for Leeds, I think, that following year or so. So that was part of the work that I was doing. It was bring together also the things that I was interested in, like acting. So yeah.
You mentioned a sit-in. What was the sit-in about?
I don't remember. But we were
University Hall.
Yeah, we were here before Need Blind Admission.
That's
and I
right.
think that
there was a lot
of
discussion about that.
About financial aid.
Yeah.
So
that was class of 92, where 250 plus were arrested, I believe. Mm-hmm. You'll talk about that next year, perhaps.
I stayed to do my first master's degree here, so I was here until the spring of 92. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't remember what that's. I remember protesting P.J. O'Rourke back in the day, my freshman year. Do you remember that? He came to campus. He was always so controversial. There was a sit-in in the president's office or something.
And then there was the Take Back the Night March.
That's right.
I remember that being a really big deal.
Yeah.
And feeling, had been previously feeling totally safe, and then, not safe. And negotiating and learning what that feels like, and how to then feel safe again. Mm-hmm. And that was
Wasn't there an issue, I vaguely remember, our junior or senior year with the list that went up in the back?
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
Because one of our fellow RAs, HCs, was accused.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And they were disclosing names on the bathroom walls.
Yeah, and accusing people of being rapist inside the stalls in marker inside female bathrooms. And wow, that was something we did not know how to talk about that or think about that. And it was the same year as Clarence Thomas's
Anita Hill.
The Clarence Thomas nomination. So that question of believing people who were accusing. And in one case, the accused was a colleague and friend of Pam and mine. So that was a very hard time because he had no idea to know who had accused him or what. From what he could tell or share with us, he seemed unaware of who was accusing him or why. So it was a tough one. It was a hard one.
And what became of that?
I believe they had an appearance on the Donahue show. Not to date ourselves.
Exactly. Wow. We did get some more national notoriety.
For some reason, I never got some national attention on that.
That and some of the Brown students working their way through school by doing exotic dancing.
Oh, I remember
that. Was before
Was that before we
and
that
during.
was?
Yeah.
And during.
Yep.
And after. I can tell.
That's right.
That was during
afterwards as well.
It's good. It's good work. And it's after class, so. What else? The cyanide pills were right before we came to campus,
that
right?
That was before.
Yeah, that was part of the notoriety of the place.
And the prostitution ring was before you.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, Darryl Brown. There's a lot going on.
Actually, it wasn't anywhere near as wacky as its reputation. That's true.
I actually considered that. I was like, is it as crazy as it's portrayed nationally? I remember asking my sister that, and she was like, no, that's like the anomaly case that just gets national attention.
Always.
And now that I remember, that was appealing, right? Because I was from a very conservative white town in Connecticut, and to go someplace that was like radical, you know? Exactly. Yeah.
And that was always the amusing thing when you would go out into the rest of the world and you hear about the impression of Brown from other students. I have a colleague, very well-known colleague. He just always talks about how Brown at that time just had a wacky appeal. So I was fine. It was for their adventurous. It was for, it was a vibrant, colorful place. So,
The most liberal of the Ivies.
the most. That's right. That's the most liberal.
There was no ROTC on campus at that time.
No,
Is
but
there-
ROTC.
Is there now?
It looks like it.
There's now?
Isn't there?
There was something in the today's bulletin about celebrating that aspect as well. So
Yeah, I
I'm
think
guessing that
that-
there is.
I'm sorry. What are we talking about?
ROTC, that.
Those are out.
Oh, RTC. Okay.
Yeah, I think they were off campus, and there were concerns about CIA recruiting on campus.
That's true.
And there was somebody who had been recruited in the earlier oral history,
Wow.
who then went on to train other spies.
Nice.
Yeah. And she had to get a release to
talk to you.
tell us.
I was going to say, did she sign that?
She had to get authorization.
That makes my life a lot different.
They did not approach me. Absolutely no poker face. They did not have made a good spy.
Is there anything about your time at Brown that you would change?
I would have done something different with my course choices. I love the idea that there was no core curriculum, but I probably would have been better off having, made different decisions, right? Like I felt like I just took classes all over the place and didn't develop, courses that would have been more part of my heart, for example. Like when I got to then, I was like, I should have taken, more art history classes. Whoops, what was I doing instead? Oh, well, I did Bio 1. I did, all these things that, didn't connect. So I wish that I had had better advising sort of freshman year. And the advising structure, as I remember it, it was through your interesting course that you took, right? So there was so I took physics for poets. That had nothing to do with, anything, right? And I didn't connect with that particular professor. And so I didn't feel like I got to it. So then my parents would say, my dad would say, well, why don't you take Chinese history? Okay, I'll take Chinese history. So that's the only thing. And what ended up is I ended up with an ed studies degree. Because when I finally did get some good advising, they looked at, you're a generalist, right? So elementary education, that would be great for you. And so that I was able to make something coherent. But I think I would have made different choices had I had a different advising. I don't know, what about you guys?
I remember coming back at our 10th, I believe, our 10th reunion, and expressing some remorse that I hadn't done something. And then Janet Cooper Nelson, who's the university chaplain, said to me, if you had done things differently, you wouldn't be who you are today. And that's what I use to remind myself.
Right.
I mean, I took all those courses too. Because, I was SCB, everybody else says BS, in Applied Math Econ. And I remember there were 32 credits for that, a lot of credits for that degree. So I was happy to take other things, but when I look back over it, if I hadn't taken them then, I probably would never have been exposed to Japanese comparative literature, a history of Vietnam, bio. That I think is what a liberal arts education is truly about. And so so now I appreciate it. I wish I had taken some courses in some other departments, but I never took a sociology course here. And I became a sociologist. Isn't that wacky?
That's great.
I'm a sociologist, but hey, it was for later. And so thank you, Brown, for what you gave me. But I guess you wouldn't be
Right.
If you're happy now, it worked out.
Exactly. And that idea of the liberal arts, which I think is really on a big decline. Don't you think from what you...
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I keep finding myself, because in my institution, we have, we're a small institution, and we have professional schools. We have a School of Education, a School of Nursing, and then a kind of an Arts and Humanities. And that School of Education is sort of being sort of it threatens the liberal arts, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm constantly trying to articulate, and we talk about the general curriculum there, and I keep wanting it to look more like this one, right? Like give the students more choice, give the students more choice. So I love that. I did love that aspect. So thank you for
But I think it also, because I mean, I was like you, I took some of those courses in the pre-med route, but then there was an awful lot of confidence when I was able to say, you know what, that's just not me. So I think the experience of taking those classes and realizing that's not me was a huge bonus to give you confidence going forward in the other area. I mean, one of my favorite things was actually going every summer. I would go over with my dad the courses that were offered at Brown because he loved it. Just seeing the variety of courses that were offered and getting his perspective, but also me sharing with him what I thought was really neat, and him kind of pushing me and saying, "Hey, Ari, why do you like that? What?" And that made me think more. So I thought there was a tremendous learning opportunity being able to pick our courses.
Did any of you have sort of specific favorite spots on campus that are still there today, or maybe not the same, or gone altogether, or any sort of that geographic centering?
I really associate with the freshman unit, right? Just because I was in Emory-Woolley, and we were just walking up Meeting Street. I was like, the Meeting Street Cafe is right there. And then I could see like and just those really strong memories of going to the gate.
Yes,
right?
with that pizza.
Yes. The gate. Is the gate even still here?
It's a gate. What about Ek Deck?
At Ek Deck.
With that
Ek Deck.
chicken sandwich.
Yes.
I remember the food.
The food, right?
Ek Deck, it's not here.
Ek Deck's not here?
But also there was a theater space over there
Yes,
too.
there's a
remember.
theater space.
Yeah, those were the days. It was dark and grungy in the Ek Deck. It was.
Yeah. And it was so far.
It was far. But it would be open if you wanted something late. I think the Ek Deck may have been.
I think it was open until midnight. Maybe?
Yeah, something like that. So you'd have to trek.
Right.
Yeah.
You'd have to trek if you wanted some food. Yeah, that's funny.
We were commenting today.
And funk night, of course.
Oh,
That's
funk
what
night.
Tonight's
Exactly.
funk night. I love fun.
The campus looks smaller, right? In a kind of a nice, cozy way, but it felt bigger then, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Now, what happened to our mailboxes?
Oh, right. Did you see at the bookstore they were selling them?
Really?
Yeah.
They're coin banks now, right?
Yeah.
Coin
They
banks?
made,
I'm
They
sorry, they're
converted
selling mailboxes?
yes, they made.
They redid Haun's house.
They took out the mailboxes, right? And they've got them so that they're like these little boxes that you can put coins in, but they're like $99. So it was like a nice idea, but not for $99.
I can't even remember what mine was, but okay. Yeah, but I know something happened to it.
So what have they put there instead? I guess people don't need mailboxes anymore, or?
I thought they had some less interesting, more conventional looking like post office.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I know a student that graduated 5 years ago pretty well. If I mailed anything to her on campus as a special surprise, I had to let her know to go check her mailbox because it just wasn't the thing that it had.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
I mean, that's the thing. When we were here, email
It was before
it was
email.
before email.
Before
Yes.
cell phones.
Before cell phones,
Before
smart,
internet.
before internet.
So we.
I know. We wrote letters.
Did you all
Right.
have write-on, wipe-off memo
Yeah.
boards on your
absolutely.
door?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yes, exactly.
And you really needed to rely on that to meet with people. We were just talking today because one of our friends lives in Scotland and she's here for a reunion and she doesn't have international roaming on her phone. So we've had to, so you can't text her. So we have to, okay, let's meet at around this time at this place, which is exactly what we used to do.
Right.
The other thing that I've been thinking is, because we didn't have the social media or the texting or anything, I wonder if we talked more, right? I wonder how. I look at my college students now, and they're waiting for class, and they're not talking; they're texting. Exactly.
I think the big time was after like 10:30 at night in the dorms. Like I was in Emeryville my first year, second year, and I just remember everybody kind of hanging out in the hallway, just talking at night.
Yeah.
So that was a huge aspect.
And that's where we worked through a lot of these issues, right?
Absolutely. And it was civil. I think we learned the lessons of civility and learned how to listen. Brown was good about that. The WPC program, the RC program, the MPC program, I think we really were careful about making sure we made these try to safe spaces. At least that's what I remember in my units, most of us, to make
And
those
I'm just
safe
going to
spaces.
ask you to say what those acronyms are, because 20 years from now, they might not exist.
Well, the resident counselors, the women's peer counseling program, the minority peer counseling program, we would get some training together. We had our separate training, but that was also, those are the things that helped me learn how to become a facilitator, to become an active listener, to help facilitate or cultivate that in others. And I remember I was nervous those first 3 times, because we were also being told, like, anticipate big problems because everybody's coming, you don't know what they're bringing sometimes, and trying to learn how to be a support system for people who were your peers, really, but a couple of years younger than you. And so I think that is what helped us. I would attribute some of that helped us learn how to listen and talk to each other.
Right. And you just reminded me of something that I was involved in, which with the acronym was RISK. Do you remember that? Relationships involve skills and communication. I don't know how I got involved in it, but it was, I became a leader in that group, and I got to sit with younger brown people and talk about sex and relationships and in a way that I would never have imagined that I would have been able to do, and felt the space for that. That was just incredible.
Was that the first place we heard the sentence prompt, I feel when you...
Yes.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's so right.
Which I use to this day.
Right, and then
You did, I do, me too.
Exactly, and then the born again virgin sort of that we talked a lot about.
Oh, wow.
I think the other thing about being here before the digital era is, and it's something I struggle to articulate to my current students, is the library and the professors and the books were the sources of information. And so information itself was the commodity, was the currency. And now information is readily available. So we don't, the finding and identifying of information is not the skill that my students come to college for. Because in 0.6 seconds they can know anything that they want. They don't need to ask, Bill Keach to explain it to them, or find it in the card catalog, or read about it in an article, print version of an article. And so now when I try to explain something like plagiarism, or why that pushes the buttons of their faculty so much, I have to back up and say, because it used to be really hard to find information. That used to be hours of work to go looking for things. And when information's available at your fingertips, it's hard to remember that was what we came to school for, in part, or what we thought we were coming to school for. So the shift now that no one needs to go to school to get information. They need to go to school to find out what to do with all the information they have, and how to use it, and how to synthesize it, and how to process it, and how to communicate it. But that really was, going to the library really was the place you went to find something out. There was no other place to go.
But so Chris, you make me think of something that I think may be a major cultural change from our time to today too. And I've seen a change in the classroom over however long I've been in the academy. But I also think, Sharon, it goes back to something you were saying too. I think what our education at Brown did for us was also appreciate learning for learning's sake in many ways, without the social media. Maybe we were pre-professional and very instrumental about what the degree was going to get us, but I think it's much more stark today. Like, lots of students come to school to get the degree, to get the job, to make a lot of money. And I feel like the management consulting was a big thing on campus. They were coming and recruiting when we were here. I remember that pressure, especially if you were applied math econ, that's what you were supposed to do. And I ended up hating that. But I felt like one of the things this open curriculum did was if you ventured outside of your major or what you thought you were going to do, it also allowed you to be a little bit more liberated about learning in a way that today, and maybe because the costs are much greater, the cost of higher education, you know, parents want their students to do a certain thing, and certainly some of that was there too with us, but it's a much more instrumental approach. And I wonder, I can't say anything about the class of 2016, but I do wonder if we have more freedom just to love learning and to as opposed to today's cohort, which has to deal in a period where inequality is much more rampant. There's a lot more competition, a lot more anxiety about what kind of job I'm going to get, and am I going to be in the top 1%, et cetera, et cetera.
Tremendous debt load. Too.
Yeah.
I mean, the average U.S. student leaves school with $29,000 plus in debt, and that's an average. That's not. Yeah. Right. But you mentioned the sort of shock of junior year. Was that part of what was going on? Was that?
No, I think it was just life. I was in a co-ed fraternity. I was at Alpha Delta Phi, which was a huge time investment and absolutely worth it because most of us came back minus 3 or 4 people this year. So that was a real fulcrum to my life. I was leading the Brown Christian Fellowship group on campus and trying to do good in the world and double majoring. So it was a little bit ridiculous looking back at it. But it was an amazing experience, and I do think that reflecting on this, I've got 2 nieces and a nephew who are, plus or minus college age. So one going into her senior year, and the others who have been through this really impacted system in California, right, where they're going the back route of a junior college, community college, into a 4-year, like UC Davis or Berkeley, if they're very lucky. And I actually live 10 minutes away on the north side from Berkeley, so look me up when you get there. But I wonder, provocatively, if we're seeing some version of the death of the liberal arts education. Everything that we're talking about here, the digital age, everybody's just doing this, and so they're really not engaging in that kind of community. And I think there is something absolutely true to a face-to-face interaction and where those conversations go. And social media is interesting, absolutely, but it's not the same as sitting in the hallways until 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Right? And some of those memories that we've been reminiscing through 25 years later, we still remember those conversations at 4 a.m. or the next morning, and it was a very, I think, impactful time, not just in society and where we were at, and certainly where the community of Brown was at, but individually and where we were all coming. And I think that's the genius of the admissions process. So I'm a little sad for some of the folks that I know in this generation who aren't getting a 4-year on-campus education and experience, because they're just never really even going to know what they missed. Right. And so having that 6 months or a year outside in a startup environment, as an example, in the Bay Area, it's pretty endemic. It's not the same. It's a completely different thing, but it's not the same as wondering what pizza to get at 2 a.m. again, right? Or fighting with your roommate about their choice of David Bowie albums they're playing that day. So it's fundamentally a different experience.
And I feel that there's going to be consequences, for as you're saying, the demise of liberal arts, the kind of talking to each other. Then you learn to talk to people and you learn to listen, and that generations are coming after us that aren't having those skills developed in that way is going to have huge social consequences. I don't know what they are, but I really worry about that.
Right. But and I think you hit on it when you said there's a love of learning, because it was a love of learning the whole thing. I think now with information being so available, like you kind of find the information that you want and that supports where you're going, and you don't always see the other side.
Right.
Exactly.
Whereas those 3 a.m. conversations, you saw the other side through that communication or through a love of learning. You're like, oh, wait, that's a really good argument. How does that affect what I think? Yeah. So I think that's the concern.
Right.
I think even the skill of arguing and negotiating, too, is really important. And it's not the perfect example, but you'll get some of the frankly insipid conversations that people have online. That's not a negotiation or argument. That's a flame returned by a flame returned by a flame. That's not I'm really listening to you, or I have a real intent to hear you. and to state my case and to hear yours. It's not an appreciation of that art and that skill.
And in the context that Prue mentioned of an expectation of civility.
Absolutely.
That
And respect.
however vehemently we disagreed about which president to vote for,
Yeah.
there was an expectation that we could conduct that conversation civilly and that there would not be long-standing grudges, and that we, it sounds so cliche, but that we knew how to agree to disagree in ways that didn't feel personal or vindictive or ad hominem at all.
We sound like our parents. But it's true, it's developmental. I mean, because there's cultural change every generation. We're exactly a generation ahead now. So it's fascinating to sit here and listen and to think how things have changed, and to even try to think about how this generation is going to be talking about what changed for them 25 years from now.
Do you do archive interviews for, say, the 5th reunion? That would be an interesting contrast.
Not so far, but as I said, I have connections to the 5th reunion, so my glimpses into that mindset are sometimes refreshing and interesting. Sometimes it's really depressing.
As Brown begins to attend more intentionally to that first generation student, and this is something that worries me. I was telling you, the regional comprehensive that I serve is, we really don't want the liberal arts or the arts in general to become the purview of the wealthy, because we have to teach economic self-defense to the first generation student. So that's part of it. Not only will it dissipate or will it become, once again, sort of just the purview of the elite, that you can do an art history degree, but I have to go get an engineering degree because I have to get right to work and you can afford to go to Europe the year after. That kind of tracking that I think we managed to avoid.
We recorded, Tris. We had the same thing. I think that may be a sociological phenomenon that endures in this country because of its economic foundation. I remember explicitly back in our class, lots of us were pre-professional. We thought we had to do engineering or go into business or do pre-med because we were first or 1.5 generation of college. I certainly felt that pressure. When I applied to Brown, I thought it was about college was about making money until I got to Brown and got into the actual culture of learning here. And I've seen that over the last 15, 20 years in among all of my students at elite universities, particularly, where I've taught. So that may be something that's a little more enduring because of a global phenomenon.
Or a developmental phase.
A developmental
that
phase.
As you achieve adulthood, that's an expectation you take on.
But you're saying that two students who come from very disparate class backgrounds, the wealthier student, a more privileged student, might have the privilege of thinking about art history or thinking about, at Stanford, the humanities are dying because everybody thinks Silicon Valley is the next one. It is Wall Street, and everyone thinks they have to come out there for engineering or computer science to be in the tech startup. And so I think many of the universities are struggling, but the students who can go into the humanities and think and don't worry about it as much are still the more privileged students.
I worry about it breaking. So far, it's not. I mean, I have English majors in my office saying, what am I going to do from all backgrounds? But I do worry that, as you say, one, losing communication skills, and two, sort of a new version of class warfare that involves, the academy going back to being the purview of the elite and some other sort of practical, or as you said, instrumental education becoming a question of economic necessity.
Well, I'd like to make an observation, and maybe you won't have a reaction, maybe you will. But again, as I said, I've been reviewing oral histories with individuals and with groups of many different ages, and it's just particularly striking to me today that even compared to the 50th reunion women, who there were 3 lawyers in the group, and everybody had very interesting. There was a spy, very interesting professional careers. There was so much content in what they spoke about, talking about their relationships in relation to male counterparts, male authority figures, dating. All of that is very much part of what they were thinking about everything, and you know, as background, if not the focus. And you haven't talked about that once.
Wow.
That, and you know, good for us. Maybe we've come that far. That
we've named any men except Dave Zucconi.
And you know, I was sitting here thinking, like, it would be great to get on, you know, for the record, like, what was dating like in the early '90s at Brown? But I didn't go here, but.
Well, it also just depends. It may depend on the makeup of the group in terms of our sexual orientations or how male-centered our lives are. Or, I feel that's very fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, there's just such an agency, I think, in women of later generations that, thank goodness. I can't imagine.
Right, I remember we were spelling women with a Y. Remember that?
That's right.
We were. Yep.
So,
and I also remember that sort of joke going around, at least among the kind of heterosexual population, that there's no dating at Brown. No one dates at Brown. People hook up, maybe, but the dating wasn't the thing, because it was more. You didn't want to miss out. You didn't want to kind of pair up and miss out on other people, right? That's kind of
or the concept compared to 50s and 60s, where you wouldn't go to an event without an escort of the opposite sex,
right?
Which could be problematic in and of itself, but
right.
That was just the expectation. Whether or not there was actual interest there, that's just how you went places.
No, I mean, I think from all of my experiences outside the classroom, in the classroom, it was all about developing as a person and then as a female leader. I mean, it was an independence.
Right.
It's a strong feminist consciousness here on this campus.
Really strong.
Yes.
Really strong.
Yes.
And I remember going afterwards to Australia, where I was working in a very conservative, with a very conservative sort of small company. We were sailing sailboats, and and I was kind of working. One day I was sort of working in the office, and I was asked to go fetch me a cup of tea. Right? I was like, you can't ask me to do that. And just
what are your legs broken?
And then quickly realizing that I was not at Brown anymore. And that context where I was at, they absolutely could ask me to do that, and they did. And I went and got the tea, and I understood that. Yeah. But I also remember that coming to Brown too, and there were lots of having those kind of mixed gender, the co-ed halls. Right.
Yeah, that's right.
And we were hanging out with men, and they were part of all these conversations. Right, and that being so comfortable, and being different than high school, where there was more. You didn't have men as friends, and really developing those friendships. And a lot of the people that we're seeing over reunion are those really good male friends.
That's right. That's right. But that's the funny thing. We talk about liberating space. I had the flashback memory of a couple in the shower together. Like, I came from conservative South where they still had single-sex doors. I mean, you could have that option here, of course. But, I saw couples in the shower together, and it was just like, that's Brown. That's what I remember about Brown. And so it was a different, even our spatial relationship of the different genders was different here, right?
Right.
Co-ed fraternity.
Co-ed fraternities, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a joke, but I think in a community that close, we're just people. It's a shocking notion that we're just all people, men, women, whatever. And I remember after my first semester, I think I was going to visit my brother who lived in Southern California for Christmas, and I was referring to the cookies that his wife was making. And I called them gingerbread people. And my brother was like, gingerbread people? What are you talking about? Oh, God, it's only been 4 months.
That's wonderful.
That feminist rhetoric was so strong. What we would recommend to each other to read.
Yes.
Incredible.
But wow, now, I believe more firmly even now than I did then that language and thought are the change agents. In choosing those words and spelling women with a Y, we were creating spaces that we hadn't previously imagined. And so my experience was growing up in a childhood that included a private beach club. And coming back after my first year at Brown and going to the club and realizing that most of the people I was closest to at Brown wouldn't be welcome at the club, and electing to never walk back in. I mean, just like, but never. I mean, just you said consciousness raising. That's the version that I needed. I was like, wow, this norm is not norm anywhere but here, and it's not a norm that I want to reinforce. So I think that gingerbread people, that created a space, right? Like, absolutely. And that was far more than rebellion or gesture or knee jerk. It was, it was a hole in this fabric that we were consciously and subconsciously dismantling. Yeah. Whether it existed or we had perceived, or it had been handed to us, we were. It's a great example.
Yeah, and 18-year-old brains, and we're just sponges, right? We're sponges. And I don't remember being a robotic automaton thinking everything made sense. I remember thinking a lot of things didn't make sense, actually, when we talk about race as an example. And growing up in Southern California and then overseas, and as I mentioned, I hadn't been in the U.S. for 6-7 years. I came back here. I was actually at Mochamp. I think most of us lived in Pembroke, it sounds like, our first year. And coincidentally, a good friend of my mother, her niece was also on the same hall, and she was from Northern California, but I remember knocking on her door and saying hello, and there were two of us just right down on that strip who were Asian American, and I remember some of our other classmates, again, that first week of the unit. And the unit was a bunch of great people, very close-knit, but we were coming in with our own prejudices and our own prisms and lenses. And I remember people saying, wow, they're so integrated. What do you mean? We're California. Aren't we half the population in that state? Yeah. And so I just remember that, and even the TWTP program, and I think I'd come in for what was called BRIO at the time, the International Student Orientation that happened right after, maybe overlapped. And I thought, TWTP, I mean, that language is so dated and racist in itself. Third world? Why third world? These are Americans, right? So I think that time was so interesting for us. We maybe were that first generation, or maybe we just like to think so because we were part of it. Divorced from our mother's experience, divorced from this experience, that maybe somewhat of a unisex experience, one might argue, that had that consciousness. We were right on that cusp. Yeah. Interesting times.
But I think it's important it stays with us too. Because I think now we go into environments and we see something that, from our Brown experience, we say, "Wait a second, this isn't right," and we now have the skills because of Brown to be able to say, "Hey, let's talk about this," or what can I do to help change the environment and be a change agent in it? And I think that's tremendous in compliment to Brown.
Right. And you talked about that, being sponges. Another way to look at that I really like is open to possibilities, right? So we're somehow that was a big thing that was fostered, is that you had to be open to all these possibilities. And once you're open, then you're understanding, and that's how you're relating with other people and seeing all these points of view. So there's very much this existential quality that Brown is fostering with that is that the liberal arts? Like, what is that? That's really present,
There's this great trend right now in sort of, I don't know if it's sociology or pop psychology, Prue, tell me, but the art of being wrong, right? Like deliberately choosing not to be the smartest person in the room.
What does that mean?
Looking for opportunities
to be wrong,
to be corrected, to learn more, to change your understanding, and the idea that that's something that now needs to be intentionally articulated or taught. I mean, Aristotle says it's the mark of an educated mind is to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it, right? So, but I think that's part of what getting here at 18 taught me. Is like, you're not right. And that's fantastic. You're about to get a lot smarter and a lot more worldly and a lot more sensitive and a lot more aware, and to really find joy in that. So the idea now that people need to read a book to convince themselves to seek out those opportunities and awarenesses, and maybe that's for me part of what I feel like I got here. It's, okay, 3 a.m. in the hallway. What don't I know? I don't,
and not. Oh, what it burst how it fundamentally changes us and what we burst out from. Because I'm listening to these stories, and I'm also reminded, for myself personally, I think I have such a fierce commitment now to radical inclusion in the society because of the kind of people I experienced, the stories I heard, the narratives here at Brown. And, even religion. We hadn't talked about religion. I came from a very religious family, and I remember going back after freshman year, my parents' minister, there was a Sunday school class, and they were talking about something and the people who were not Christians. And I remember asking the minister, so, I have all these friends at college. They're not Christian. They're really good people. Some of them agnostic, some of them atheists, some of them Muslim, whatever. And there's no way I'm going to believe that they're not good. They're going to hell. And he got really angry at me for bringing that home. And that's the day he lost me. And so, and I tell my parents the story all the time. It's not that I lost hold of religiosity, not spirituality per se, but religiosity, institutionalized religion, because I refused to believe that most of the people in this world were not special because they weren't Christian. And that's something that I gathered, which is why segregation is so problematic to me. Because had I not come to a place like Brown, I would probably not have been able to live amongst these different kinds of people. And I'll forever be grateful for that, for the experiences and the exposure I've had here.
Well, that's a super good thought to end on, but if anybody else wants to share any parting Well, thank you all for coming. I know there are lots of other tempting activities during your reunion weekend, but I think it's incredibly important to get these stories recorded and for yourselves, for future generations, and for researchers too.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, crew.